Hey there, this is a video tutorial regarding the creation of a rock formation for your environments. So this is the part 1 of the video tutorial. I've made an introduction video which you can find on my YouTube channel if you haven't seen that. So we'll first start off making a base mesh in Maya, like I said in the introduction video. So in this process, we'll first just start off by making blocking out a mesh for sculpting in Mudbox. So first of all, what you need to do is make sure that the settings in Maya that Maya is set up to work in centimeters. So you go to preferences and go to settings and switch it to centimeters. Now all you gotta do is just create a cube and just change some of its settings. We'll go and take a look into the attribute editor. We'll change the Y to 128, the height 256, and that to 128. That way you'll get some sort of rectangular cube. We'll turn on snapping and move this cube at the center of the grid. Alright. Now what we're going to do is add in a subdivision. That way we'll have evenly distributed polygons all over the mesh when we start subdividing the mesh in Mudbox. Now all we need to do is just maybe use a value of 16 in height, value of 8 in width and depth. That way you need to make sure to have square-like polygons in order to have evenly distributed polygons all over the mesh when you split it out. Alright. Now all we have to do is just export this cube here to Mudbox. So you go to File, Export Selection, or you can just make a shortcut in your shelf, and while pressing on Control and Shift, click on Export Selection and it will appear in the shelf box. In my case it already has been done. It's over here. But before we export this, we'll go back on the desk and create a folder for our asset. So I'll just name the folder rock_tutorial and leave it on my desk. That's where I'll export all the textures and renders, and as well as the models. Everything will be inside the folder and organized correctly. That way you'll just have to go inside the folder and look for whatever you need. So inside this folder here, we'll just create a renders folder where all the renders that we will make later on from Xnormal or Mudbox, we'll just save them all here and also put all the texture work all inside this folder. Alright, we can close the folder and go back to Maya. Now we'll export selection, go to the folder that you just created, and save it over here. We'll just name it rock01 base. Stands for base mesh. Hit on export, but I need to go back again. I forgot to tell you that you need to set it to export as an OBJ export format. Alright? Now we're done with Maya. We'll go open up Mudbox. I'm currently using Mudbox 2013. The differences between 2012 and 2010, there aren't that many differences. Maybe you'll just have the menu showing up on the side, for example, for the tabs here, layer objects and viewports. 2012 they will show up on the top, and the previous versions as well. But there aren't any real noticeable difference. The tools are all the same. They're all organized in the same way, even though I'll still have some extra selection tools, but these are usually found in the menu in the previous versions. Okay, now all we have to do is import that base mesh that we just exported from Maya. So it is on the folder which is on my desk. This is the one. I'll open it up. Okay, so some of you might have this kind of problem. We have a shading problem here. It's due to the light settings. So all you have to do is just go to the light presets and switch the light settings, find the correct angle. To fix the issue, we can also try different light settings to have proper shading showing up. Anyways, over here we have around 640 polygons. We'll just subdivide this a few times. That way you can have enough definition to sculpt on. Around 40k is fine for doing the major changes. So we'll also first use a grab brush to kind of modify it a bit. In this step here we'll just be doing some very basic rocks without having any too much definition, just as doing cracks and openings. Just want to break out a bit the rectangularity, the hardness of the edges, but that will be done by using the scrap brush. Alright, grab the scrap brush. So what you need to do first is just change view settings in your brush. So when you go to scrap brush, you just switch the strength to 100. Use a stamping. The stamping is a default one that you can find here in the stamp menu, stamping tab. This is the one I'm using. It is the bw_cliffface.tif. So you select this stamp, you check the randomize box, and switch this rotation randomize value all the way to the max. This one changes the fact that the stamps jitters from horizontally, and this one is controls the jitter for the vertical jitter. This one is, let's say that it gives you randomizes the size of the stamp. Well, we could use it as well if you want to add some extra randomness. But if you just hover your mouse on top of one of the options, you're pretty much going to get a whole explanation and description of whatever each slider does. Okay. Now I changed this stamping to the stamping spacing to 0. Well, if you hover over it, you still get the description. If you're new to Mudbox, it's very self-explanatory and very easy to understand. Build up to around 100. Lower values will give, let's say, if you do a stroke, think of it as the time for the stroke to reach its maximum strength. So low values, it'll take more time for the brush to hit its maximum strength. If you hit 100, you get extremely hard-edged brush strokes and very strong ones. So in this case, I use a value 100. That way, we get really hard edge scraps when we start modifying the mesh. The direction is set to average normal, which is the default value. Also, what we need to do is create another scrap brush. You could just select your scrap brush after modifying its values. Go over here, click on the little arrow, and use Add and select Tools. Name it Scrap Hard. Press OK. But its already has been created, as it told me again. So the Scrap Hard brush has fairly similar settings as the one I used in the original one, but this one has its direction, the projection for the brush set to camera. Now we'll look into this later on when I start using it, but just keep in mind that the values here, that the strain is set to 100, the stamping could be 6 or 3. You can experiment with the values that you like. The build up is set to 100 and the update plane is checked. Just the direction that is changed to camera. This is very important. It just switches to camera for scrap hard. And we can look at what's the difference between having a scrap brush set to average normal and the one that has camera projection on. So average normal, what's going to do? Well, it's gonna just when you use your brush, it's actually just going to use the average of all the normals where the polygons are facing. So you can manage to smooth out and make some nice erosions on your rocks. Okay, so if you use the scrap brush that's set to camera, so the orientation of your scraps is gonna be dependent on your camera, on where your camera is facing. So let's say that I wanna do a scrap like this, but if I do without moving the camera, if I do a scrap like this, it's still gonna have the same facing angle as the first scrap I did. So this could be really good if you wanna achieve some very hard edged surfaces. If I turn off the stamping, for instance, and if I want to emphasize the hardness of the face that I want to create, I can just turn on stamping, and you can see how hard edged the surface is. This could be really good if you want to achieve some very hard edged surfaces, or you could use this for hard surface modeling if you want, hard surface sculpting, I would say. Alright, these are the two things that you need to do about the scrap brush. You also might want to create a stamping brush. The stamping brush will be used for stamping out details to help you. You could use the stamps, and you can just scatter out random detail on your rocks to refine a bit the detail if you want. So it is based on the sculpt brush. So you do the same step again. You just click on the little arrow here and go to add tools and name it to whatever name you want. And the settings that I'm using here really all depends on what you want, and also depends on the resolution of your mesh. The strength, you can change it on the fly. The stamping, same thing with randomized settings on. But an important thing that you need to keep in mind is you need to set the stamping distance around 20 or 15. Well, if you read the description, the higher value, the more spacing you're gonna get between each stamp. Okay. The build up is set to 50. All right. Let's cancel whatever we sculpted here. Now, once you're done setting up all the brushes that you need, and this is pretty much all you need to make these basic rocks that are going to be used as a building block in 3D code later on. So we'll start off using the scrap brush to really fast and easily shape a rock. So it's just that. And as you can see with these brushes, it's really fast and easy to get some nice shapes on whatever rock you want to sculpt. Now, keep in mind that I'm just using the mouse, which is I don't have any pressure control over the brushes, but really while doing these rocks, all you need is just good scrap brushes, and you just shape out the edges, the hard edged areas. You don't really need to have tablets to sculpt this kind of rock formation or rock sculpting. Let's see. We'll probably add in one more subdivision later once we're done just scrapping this area a bit. Okay. One thing about the shortcuts, I've been asked that about some shortcuts when I did a previous tutorial regarding the terrain creation uh, for Cryengine and UDK. So if you hit B on your keyboard, well, pressing B, you just left click to change the size of your brush. If you hit on M, you can change the strength of your brush. These are two shortcuts that you will use a lot if you're sculpting and using Mudbox as your primary sculpting application. This is pretty much one of the shortcuts that I use a lot. If you hit A, you get a full view of your model. But if you hover over an area on your model and press on F, you'll focalize where your brush or your mouse is. And keep in mind that it all depends on the size of the brush and how far you can focalize. If I have a really big size on my brush and hover down here, for example, and hit on F, you get a it is proportional to the size of my brush. But if I lower it down to something really small like this and hit F, you get a closer look. Okay. Use a scrap hard brush to ship out some edges to give it a bit some of that rocky feel. Well, I need to fix a bit of light presets because really this doesn't give me a good idea of the volume. This is a really important part because you need to have a good light preset, a light setting that will give you a good idea of the volume. This is really important. This is really important. That way you can have a good sense of volume and see exactly where you're sculpting and where you're adding or removing. I guess this could do. Yeah. At the moment, I'm just working with a mesh that has around 163,000 polygons. This is fairly low res for a sculpt. Uh, but it's always good to start doing the major changes when you're at the early stages before going to before subdividing and adding more detail, fine detail. So just avoid subdividing your mesh up to a million polys right out of the start, because you're gonna have lots of that stretching showing up when you do some changes. So unless your mesh has a topology that allows that, as you can see here, we got quite some stretching, but it will be fixed later on when I subdivide the mesh again. And you'll have to tweak it through by using the smooth brush a bit as well. again, I'm just using the scrap hard brush that has a camera direction set to camera direction, so with the direction set to camera. Alright, we'll subdivide this once more. In order to subdivide this just without going to the menu, just press on Shift D and it'll subdivide it once, and you can have a look here at a total poly count. I'll switch to the scrap brush to refine some of these edges a bit and clean them up. All you want to turn on stamping is up. Just hard scrap a bit. Really the scrap brush set of camera really gives you some interesting sculpting, uh, and really gives you that nice feel for the rock. You could also use it for like defining cracks or making ruins. Let's say a concrete pillar where it has where one part of it is broken, and this could really help you define that broken part. You could also do the exact same thing in ZBrush if you're a ZBrush user. Uh, just the name of the brush is saying that it is different, but the exact same result can be done in ZBrush, if not better. Also remember, when you work with a scrap brush, really the orientation or where your camera is facing is really important. So sometimes if you want to sculpt in one part, let's say this one, and you want to make some sort of crack in it, really you need to orientate your camera in a way where the brush will actually cut, depending on the camera orientation. Yeah, at this point I'm just like randomly putting some details and shipping off some edges. Just want to get some interesting shapes, because this is pretty much just going to be used as a part of a bigger rock formation. I could have, if I wanted to, I could have done this in a traditional way. I could have just used this blocked out piece of rock, and actually just copped in the cracks and different parts of rocks all together here in Mudbox. But I think that in my opinion, this will take much longer than um, than using 3D codes, where you can just grab this piece of rock, scale it non-uniformly, and merge it with another piece of rock really fast, instead of just trying to sculpt these individual rocks that make your rock formation. And I will suggest you to take a look at a bunch of references. This is really important because people usually just go ahead and try to sculpt rock, but uh, sometimes they don't even think about taking a look at real life pictures of how rock are made, because usually when you deal with rock formation, sometimes you want to make a large rock formation. There's a flow to the rock. It is important to give a flow to your rock. But we'll look into that later on when we start putting together all these parts and give a flow to the rock by like resizing the rock and placing them in a way where it would look much more natural instead of having just a bunch of rocks put together, randomly put together. It needs to look natural, as if erosion actually formed that rock formation, or true glaciation. I'm not sure if you say it that way. It's just the process where water goes through some cracks. When it turns into ice, it gains volume, and it will enlarge the cracks, and in some cases, it will ship off whole chunks of the rock, which will naturally fall down. Flatten out this area just a bit. So at this point here, we're pretty much doing just uh, changing the general shape of the rock, and at the same time giving it a texture, a material, a rock feel to it. That's the point of using stamp texture. I guess we can subdivide this one more time. Disable the grid. Smooth this area just a bit. See if we can do something here. I guess so. Okay, I guess we're done with scrapping the rock. We could probably start off doing some stamping and adding some final detail. We don't want to spend too much time on this here in Mudbox because most of the work is going to be done in 3D Code anyways. And rock formation will definitely look much more interesting than it is right now. Just fix a few things. And grab the stamp brush, scale it up a bit. Just down a few values, might turn down the strain. Alright. Just do a few brush hits, a few clicks here and there to add a bit of definition where you feel like it's just too boring. And again, the stamping that I'm using is just the same stamping that I use for the scrap brush. It's the cliff face stamp. You could also make your own stamps. There's documentation that you can check out in the help. Yes, in the Mudbox help. It'll send you to a website where you can just search for stamp, and there is a section for it for creating your own stamps. I guess this is fine for very basic rock. I mean, it looks more like a blob to me at the moment. But thing is, I'm not gonna afford spending too much time on Mudbox. I could probably make like a final high poly model in Mudbox and sculpt this in a traditional way. But this is really a step where you could, if you want to, you could spend more time and have much more interesting shapes and much more refined and cleaner details. And if you want to, you could even add some cracks, and later on, it will definitely look better once you start putting some of these rocks together in 3D code. But I'll just stop here since this is just a video tutorial or workflow video that I'm showing you. So we're going to export this mesh here as an OBJ file again. So in order to do that, you just go to the Object List tab and select your pcube1. I don't know how it's going to be named on your Mudbox session, but for me this is the only mesh here in the scene. So just select this here, and it will turn yellow, and you go to File, Export Selection. You go to the folder that you created on your desk, and we'll export this as, we'll create a folder inside this rock underscore tutorial folder, and we'll call it rock parts. That way you'll put all the different rock models that you've sculpted in Mudbox all in one folder, and we'll just name this one rock part 1 or part 01. So you'll wait this until it get exported. So your base mesh really don't have to be that high poly actually. In this case I went all the way up to 2,600,000 polygons, but it could have probably just stick with almost a little over 500,000 polys. This is probably enough because you'll have a bunch of these all put together, and it is faster to work with a mesh that has 500,000 polygons in 3D code than using a very high resolution mesh like 2 million polys. I'll export one at 500,000, that way we won't have to come back to Mudbox again. I'll just name it underscore half. Because if the one that has 2 million polygons is too slow to work with, we'll just use this one, which is a half resolution, actually a quarter resolution. Now all you gotta do is open up 3D code. You could get a trial version that is fully functional on their website. Let's just go to their website. Now what 3D code is it is a sculpting application. It regroups multiple tools in it. You could do retopology in it. You could texture just like in Mudbox. Like you could use the paint feature. You could just directly paint on your model. You got voxel sculpting. Where else? You can create the UVs for your mesh. And well, all you gotta do actually just check out the website, because there's really lots of features, and it is actually extremely powerful because you could pretty much like regroup all the tools that you use all in one single package. You could create your base mesh in it. You could like through voxel sculpting, you can then create the UVs for it, the topology for it, and then texture it, render out the normals, the ambient occlusion, and export a finished asset out of one single application. Well, it is really good, but to me personally, I mean, I really got used to the tools in Mudbox. I find the interface a bit more friendly. 3D Code has an interface that is friendlier than ZBrush. ZBrush, if you're like you're a user of 3D Studio Max, Maya, and all these 3D applications, but if you come to use ZBrush as a new user, the interface is gonna be like kind of alien to you. 3D Code doesn't have a problem. 3D Code has an interface very simple to understand. The navigation cameras is the same as you could use in, very similar to what you can find in 3D Studio Max, similar to what you can find on Maya, and pretty much exactly the same as what you can find on Mudbox. You just use the Alt key and hit the left key to rotate, for example, zoom, and with the mouse middle key to pan, and right click to zoom in and out. So I'm using a free trial. As I was saying, you could grab the free trial, a trial version on their website here in the download section. All you gotta do is you gotta hit download, and you gotta 30 days fully functional trial. So you could export models, do finished assets. You pretty much get the whole application for 30 days, and it should give you a good idea of what you can find. And if you like it, you could just buy it. And I think the price is fairly affordable, really affordable. I'm not sure exactly. I'm actually planning to buy it because this pretty much has been implemented in my workflow. Well, the education version is $99. I'm guessing that the limitation here, no commercial use, 2048 by 2048 text and resolution, and layers amount is limited to 7. While the professional version is the fully functional one, I guess. Well, pretty much, yeah. Even the professional version, 349, is very affordable to what you could find out there next to Mudbox and ZBrush. So, I like to use Mudbox especially for its voxel sculpting system. I mean, voxels are different than polygons. If you're sculpting with voxels, think of it as if you were sculpting with real clay in real life. You can actually add volume, subtract volume. Uh, Imagine you're doing Boolean operations on your sculpt, as if you're using Boolean operation like Boolean subtraction in 3D Studio Max or in Maya. This is pretty much the same. You could add volume really fast without having any stretching problems that we had here in Modbox. If you like use crazy amounts of strain brush, at some point, if you go to wireframe, you can see that the polygons are stretching out, and if you want to add some fine detail in this area, it won't work. It will look just terrible. You won't have that kind of limitation with voxel sculpting. But anyways, the goal here, what we need to do, since we've exported that model here that we made in Mudbox, we could have probably made the exact same thing, because you could actually do per vertex, micro vertex painting, I guess. Let me see. I never tried it out, but you get a description here. You could do the exact kind of polygonal sculpting that you could find it in 3D Code as well. But since I'm much more familiar with 3D Code, with Mudbox, sorry, and I've been using this for over 2 years now, I prefer using Mudbox because I have my favorite tools here. I got access to my favorite stamps. I got a database of stamps for making cracks or whatever detail I want to create. Even some 16-bit height maps so you can find, or stuff that you can add, just hand painted stuff in grayscale. Very easy. Uh, well, thing is, you get also the same thing here in 3D Code, but I still haven't learned how to use the full application, but at least I'll show you some of the important features that you need to use in order to create unique looking rock formations. Um, so when you go to create file new, and you'll get a window, or if you want to open up 3D Code, you just go to voxel sculpting and click here on the empty box to start off with an empty canvas. This is the main menu for all the tools that you want to use. These ones here are the tools that are deals with sculpting, direct sculpting, voxel sculpting. You got the adjustment tools and the object here. So in the object tab, you want to select the merge tool. So when you select the merge tool, you get a gizmo that shows up. You get the options for the tools that shows up, and on the right you got a box here that opens up that shows you a bunch of options, a bunch of models. So we got options to use the pre-made models that come with it. These two here don't come with 3D Code. These are previously made models. So you got the ability to create a database of your own models. Let's say, for example, multiple parts that you can just select, and it will show up here, and you just press on enter and it will add it. Then if you want to add another part, just click on it and you can add it. But let's see. Let's just click on one of these. Already, these are all the ones I did previously, but I'll show you first how to add your own part. If you scroll down a bit, you'll find a plus here icon. You just click on it, and you have to go all the way to your folder where you exported the rock model that you made in Mudbox, and select your rock model. So it will read the object and it will show up here with an icon on it. Everything is automatic. Later on, all you have to do is just click on the object. It will read the object and give it some time, because there's quite a bit of latency when you try to use the merge tool, because it has to read the whole mesh and then create some sort of proxy where it will only display half the polygons. That's why you get a strip-like effect. So don't worry about it, because that way it will allow it to handle to like modify, do some scaling really fast in real time on high poly meshes. You could pretty much bring in, if you want, an 8 billion polygons mesh, and you could still use it as a part. On the left here, I'll just tell you about the important things that you need to keep in mind. So you need to keep an eye on the estimated poly count. Since voxels pretty much work in a volumetric way, it's not as if you were working on polygons. On polygons, the polys are all on a surface. But this one here, when you work with voxels, let's say if you want to scale the mesh here, the poly count will increase. So it is proportional to the size of your mesh. Think of it as matter. Think of it as atoms. The bigger, the more volume you have, the more atoms you're going to have. This is how it's going to work. So this is a good thing, actually, which means if I have multiple meshes and I want to do non-uniform scale or a uniform scale, I'll still have the same definitions, the same definition in polygons. Actually, since this is emulated and displayed in polys, technically. So we probably want to aim for something that is around 1 million polys. And since we want to give a floated rock, we are probably going to scale this in the y-axis and give it a scale that gives something, in order to get something a little more interesting. So you can move it around. The gizmos are pretty simple. If you want to rotate this around, next to this arrow here, you get these little gizmos showing up. While pressing on these, you can just rotate them in every axis. Sometimes by default, you got the leave rotated axis turned on, and you probably want to turn this off, or move only gizmo if you want to set up a custom axis from where you can just move your mesh. But just leave these unchecked. Okay, now all I did here is I brought in the mesh that I created and using the merge tool. Now, while it is in this state here, I'm just gonna press enter. Now there's some latency. That is the time to transform this polygonal mesh into voxels. So you just gotta wait a few seconds and it's gonna show up. Now it's gonna tell you if you want to keep the same size whenever you're gonna click on another part. In this case, I have like 3 different rock parts, so I'm just gonna hit yes. Now if I move this away, I have this mesh here, and this is actually voxels. Now if I wanna, for example, I could probably like start modifying the mesh if I wanted to and add modify it completely, but I'm not gonna do that. I'm just going to be using the merge tool exclusively in 3D code, even though I know that you can do much more than that, but that will definitely take much more than an hour or 2 video tutorial to display all the power of 3D code. So first, what I probably want to do, I probably want to change the shader, that's being displayed here. This white is really boring and doesn't give me a good definition of volume. I cannot really see what's going on here. It's all dark. So you got a library of shaders that come with 3D codes, and we probably want to select something that helps us give that shows us better volume. You get some shaders that are fairly similar to what you can find to in ZBrush if you want. But experiment with these different shaders and use whatever one you like, and with the one that shows you the best the volume on your model. In my case, I'm gonna use one of these two here. I guess I'm just gonna stick with this one since it has a bit more particularity. Um, if you wanna like tweak the brightness of the light that's being displayed here, you could probably like, I guess it is over here. You can change the value here, and you can tweak the brightness, the light intensity. Well, if you hover over the tool, you get a description. It's really simple to understand, anyways. Okay, so we created a first part. We'll probably want to add in more parts and merge them together and give a flow to the rock. Now, as you probably have guessed, this is pretty much going to be a vertical type of rock with some shipped out parts and a glacial type of rock where water like went into the cracks and then turned into ice and shipped off some of these parts. So we'll just bring in the same part again. So move it like inside the rock, scale it up a bit, scale the y-axis, and I can just rotate it around if I want. Now in this process here, what we're actually going to do is actually merge these two rocks together, and it's all going to be one single model, one single mesh. This is the whole magic of the voxel sculpting and how much you can do. You can really achieve very interesting effects. You could also do hard surface modeling by doing the same process using cubes. You could just subtract and add from your volume and get really interesting stuff and very complex shapes. So we'll just make sure that everything is good. I'll just press enter. So yeah, keep in mind that the higher the estimated poly count is, the more time it will actually take to merge these parts together. Now we got two parts merged together, but we obviously need to add a bit more of smaller parts to like break up the feel that it is actually two different meshes that have been put together. Press enter again to add volume. If you want to subtract volume, you could like do the same process, but while pressing control, then you press enter, it is going to subtract volume. Just wait a bit for it to work, and if I move the mesh, I've subtracted volume. And this is the power of voxels. So I'm going to cancel this step here. So while using this technique, you actually get to focus more on the silhouette of your rock formation or your models, instead of just spending so much time trying to define a shape, a specific shape. Let's say this blob here coming out. It'll take you in a traditional sculpting package. It'll actually take you like, I don't know, a few minutes of your time. While here, it take me just a few seconds. So I can actually like focus on having interesting silhouettes and interesting general shapes instead of trying to define or render the rock correctly in a specific area. Let's see. Through this method, you can pretty much create anything and sculpt anything you want from scratch. Let's say if you imagine you had a bunch of let's say stone parts, stone brick stones for making a brick wall. You could pretty much build a brick wall as if you were building one in real life and put it down through the same process through merging. You just merge them all together and place them all together, and you create any kind of shape you want. Really, it is extremely powerful. And then you could just take this to the Rotopo tool and start building your low poly mesh if you're making a hard surface model or a model that is not so as organic as a rock. Uh, this is pretty much the workflow that you could follow in 3D code, or use TopoGun if you're using a different Retopo application. I could probably try out a different parts. I didn't cover the sculpting of the different parts because I think that you pretty much, after watching me doing it in Mudbox earlier for one single part, you pretty much understand that it is pretty much the exact same process, just sculpting it differently. So if you want to do the snap rotate, you could just use the rotate gizmo, but you just rotate while pressing shift. While hitting shift, you just rotate and you get the snap rotate feature on. And as you can see, this kind of shapes would probably like take me an hour to achieve true traditional modeling and sculpting, because really, unless you have a nicely pre-made base mesh for this and lots of planning, you could sculpt this on the fly. I mean, you really don't need to do base mesh. You're not limited by polygons anymore. You just let your imagination guide you. That's all it takes. probably try out a different parts, see if we can get something interesting and a bit more variated. As you can see, by scaling the rock in the y-axis, you can give it some kind of flow to your rock, and this kind of rock has a vertical flow. Um, Once we start texturing, we could also break that verticality by adding a color texture that actually has erosion marks, sediment marks. Uh, you're gonna have layers of sediments showing up, and this will break out the verticality of the rock and make your rock formation look a bit more interesting and a bit more uniform. Um, you'll probably notice as this rock is fairly has really hard edges and very geometric. Uh, well, after sculpting a bunch of these, I really noticed that these kind of geometrical forms really help define your rock formations and give you really interesting lighting. Depending on your lighting situations in your environment, you can get really interesting shading on your rocks and helps you define the rocks instead of having just a simple blobby rock, a very round rock. Just be careful when you're merging meshes together. Be careful for repeating patterns. In this case, I merged the same rock twice in a very close area, so the repetition is very noticeable. So it's not that much of a problem. You can just use another merge and merge on top of it, and it will still hide the repetition that you had. I guess I'm going to use a different part. guess this is good. At this point, we're almost done. I mean, we haven't spent that much time. I guess it's about 15, 20 minutes. Um, if you're really good with Mudbox, you'd spend like I'd say 10 minutes doing the base mesh, 20 minutes putting together the parts in any way you want. It really depends on the resolution of your high poly mesh and how large your mesh is. And most of the time would probably be spent making the UVs for such a mesh, because there's like lots of edges here going on, and these will really, if you just do very simple UV in a single part where you just put one seam in it, you're gonna get lots of stretching, and it won't work. So once we'll start doing the UVs, it will be cut down. There'll actually be lots and lots of seams. But since we're doing a different type of texturing, we're not doing the whole Photoshop thing where you do the whole texture and you paint it all in Photoshop. We'll be doing it in Mudbox, where we'll actually be using stencils uh, and paint the texture directly on the model to cover up the seams. In the end, we'll end up with with a practically seamless model, because normal mass will be baked, ambient occlusion baked as well, and the color texture will be directly painted on the model. Yes, just one or two more merges to add, and we can move on to exporting the mesh and doing the low poly mesh. I guess that this is good enough. I mean, I could probably spend more time adding much more smaller parts like rubble on the rock formation if I want to, uh, and make it a bit more detailed. But really, this is just a video tutorial, a workflow video. That way, at least you have a good idea of how you wanna work for creating some of your assets if you want, or learn something from it. Always rotate, orbit around your model before you merge. That way you're sure that your mesh is where you want it to be. And also, when you're doing your high poly mesh, always keep in mind that this mesh is going to be duplicated multiple times and placed next to itself. So once I grab this model here, let's say I've made the low poly model and the final asset is finished. I duplicate it in the game engine and just rotate it around by, I don't know, 180 degrees. Uh, you'll still get a different result and it'll still give you more variation. I could still rotate it in the vertical way, like completely flip it by 180 degrees again, and still get the same type of rock formation, but a different rock. So just keep in mind the reusability of the rock. If you add too much unique detail, let's say detail that will be noticeable to the eye, to the human eye, that it will be that you could recognize easily. So maybe some try to avoid using patterns of rock. Let's say, imagine if I added like two small rocks here. Uh, I mean, these two small rocks will be easily recognized by the eye. If I place the same rock, scale it up a bit, I'll still see these two small rocks, and the ambient occlusion will emphasize that as well. So try to avoid adding detail that is easily recognized once you duplicate the same rock again. This kind of thing is also, you can apply it also to texturing when you're trying to make tileable textures, and this is where it is actually important to keep an eye on that part. Okay, I guess we're pretty much done. I really don't want to spend too much time here. Oops. Okay. So first, before we export this mesh in the two different versions, we'll export this exact same mesh as a polygonal object for to be used in Xnormal or Mudbox if you want to bring it back in there and add extra detail. We'll first do a cleanup process. So you wanna go to the Vox tree tab here. You right click on your volume. There's only one volume normally. You right click on it and you hit on fill voids. This will clean up if there are any, let's say, small voxel parts that are floating in the air. It will remove them automatically. And when I say small voxel parts, usually they'll be inside, and you'll find some sort of blob inside, and it will be actually part of the whole model. And when you export this as a dense quad model, a polygonal object, and when you run this through a decimation filter to make your low poly model, you'll end up with a low poly model that has small objects inside it, small blobs or cube or whatever artifacts. I'll call them artifacts more than anything else. So once you're done doing the fill voids, if you have any issues when running this through a decimation filter, you still get some extra. Really depends on how you merge your mesh. If you get any issues, run this through a smooth all filter. So what is this going to do is gonna do a subtle smooth, and it'll smooth down. You'll get smoother transitions here between the different parts. If I run this through a smooth filter, this part, for example, would be filled, and you get less definition. Obviously, yeah, you lose some of the detail, but you'll get a cleaner and smoother mesh. The smooth all, I'll probably use it more on hard surface modeling. If I'm ever doing hard surface modeling, I'll probably run this through smooth all to remove any artifacts on the edges of my mesh. Artifacts that looks like pixels or aliasing, I'd say. But in this case, since this is a organic model, it won't be that much of a problem. But I think that might want to smooth this part here, since I think this really isn't really needed. This one might have been a bit too strong. Alright, perfect. Yeah, before you export the mesh, just do a quick checkup and see if you want to smooth some areas that you don't want to have in your final mesh. You just grab the smooth brush and smooth some of the areas that you don't like. And once you're done cleaning up your high poly mesh, you can just export this. After, of course, doing a fill voids operation. Of course, save your project that way just in case if you ever get a crash. You'll still have your project. You won't have to start all over again. But anyways, you select your volume here, you go to File. We're first going to export a high poly mesh that's going to be used for baking. So you go to Export, Export Dense Quads. We'll export this to the rock tutorial folder and we'll put this over here. So we'll name this rock 01 underscore 3DC, that stands for 3D code, that way to keep things a bit organized, and underscore HP for high poly. You got a few options here, and I'll save it as an OBJ standard model format, readable by pretty much any 3D package. So you save this and it'll take a bit of time to export this mesh as dense quads. Now this is done. Now what we're going to do now is export this same mesh as a medium resolution mesh. It's going to have less polygons. At the moment here, the high poly mesh has around 2,500,000 triangles, not polygons. And since triangles, to make up one polygon you need two triangles, so you pretty much need to divide this by 2, and you get a 1,250,000 polygons if you open this in your sculpting package, or whatever package sculpting package you're using. So just keep in mind that this is in triangles, so divide this value by 2 and you can get a good idea of the amount of polygons that your mesh has when you export this as a dense quad object. But now what we're going to do is export this as a medium resolution mesh, which is going to have around 500,000 triangles to be used in Meshlab, and we'll run this through decimation filter and lower it even more to get our low poly mesh. So we go to File, Export as Object. We'll just select this and change the HP to MP, that stands for medium poly. Save this. Toolbox going to be opened. We'll just wait this for calculation. There you go. You get a description, and you have the ability to change the percentage of the reduction. So at the moment it is set to 50%. So it'll lower down by 50% the original poly count. The goal here is to have around 500k triangles. So we'll probably have to move the slider all the way up to around 80% to get around 509,000 triangles. Once you get half a million, just press OK. You give it some time to decimate this mesh. We could have probably run this through we could have pretty much also done the low poly mesh here inside 3D code by using the same decimation operation. But personally, I prefer using Meshlab because I think that the algorithm that Meshlab uses is better and cleaner than the one you have here in 3D Code. Unless I don't know how to use all the options in 3D Code, or unless I'm not using it in a proper way. But anyways, I'll show you Meshlab. Okay, now the loading box is closed, which means that the job has been done in 3D Codes. I'll just save this again, and I guess we're pretty much done with 3D Code. We can just close this, and I think that this will conclude the first part for the video tutorial. So next part will feature uh, creating the low poly mesh in Meshlab. We'll import a medium resolution mesh. Once we're done decimating the mesh, we'll send this to Maya and create the UVs, and then render out normals and ambient occlusion. In Xnormal, render out a texture or two in a CrazyBump and do some texturing while directly painting on a low poly mesh Mudbox. And to finally set it up and bring it on in Cryengine in one of the scenes that have been pre-made for it. Alright, so I'll see you guys in the next part, which should be on around tomorrow. Thank you for watching.